As an avid fan of visual novels and of online gaming discourse, I've heard the famous question, are visual novels video games? And more precisely, I've seen the rhetoric against VNs as games and read a few rebuttals as well. It's a topic I clearly have an interest and opinions on because I love quite a few VNs and always have considered them games. However, I was more concerned with the truth built upon diction and analysis over simple conclusions. So I did my research, I formed new conclusions, and established a new argument that could apply to other scenarios in the gaming sphere, as well as visual novels. And so to begin, I need to identify what a visual novel is, what a game is. I had to get to the root of it all, and nail down key components that differentiate media like video games and novels from each other, and then cross-examine with visual novels. I'll also note other arguments I've found and why they don't work for me personally, as well as examine the famed Ludo versus narrative philosophy for a bit. There's no better place than to begin by defining the VN, the visual novel, alternately translated, although rarely, the novel game, from the original Japanese word, which I'm refusing to mispronounce. A visual novel is essentially a mixed media novel that can have semi-interactive elements, given the definition on screen. Or in short, a video game usually of Japanese origin, that is of interactive fiction, is predominantly or entirely narrative, and is illustrated by static images that are often of anime style, which is according to most non-Wikipedia and Wikipedia definitions. Moving on, they're considered a subgenre of adventure games, rubbing shoulders with other styles like interactive fiction, interactive films, and immersive sims, which are definitely considered a game. Their mixed media format typically includes audiovisual and text elements, but can also include just about any other element. Credit to the indie scene and their constant push towards weirder and wilder takes with just about every genre, and definitely with visual novels. To continue, visual novels are a subgenre of adventure games, but also feature their own subgenres. The well-known Western formats include hybrids, kinetics, and the traditional visual novel, with few or semi-interactive elements alongside narration. In Japan, they distinguish similarly, but also with the identifier of NVL for novel or narration-based, and AVG or ADV for adventure games, with a focus on problem solving and concepts of gameplay interwoven into the VN. The primary two to focus on as outliers are hybrids and kinetics. The hybrid visual novels are defined by their accompaniments, or vice versa. Examples like Persona, a visual novel JRPG, although it's probably better to say JRPG visual novel, and BlazBlue, the fighting game visual novel, are iconic and well known. They're games combining genres more than just innovating within the bounds of the VN. The common argument is that these visual novels are games, but only because of their pairing. In Persona, alongside the JRPG combat, there's a lot of text and dialogue adjacent to the JRPG elements. BlazBlue's entire story is told through visual novel scenes between battles and its story mode, effectively mashing fighting games and visual novels together. The question here isn't are hybrids games, but are they games because of their partner genre, or do both genres contribute to that video game label? Are they more than just a novel, essentially? And kinetics are weird. I played almost no kinetic novels and completed even fewer, possibly none, honestly. They're defined by a lack of interactivity. They're primarily narrative and text-focused. Examples like Kiragashi, which I do want to play, Muv-Luv, and Disare, I think, are kinetic novels, and I can see them as non-interactive novels more than games. That's their selling point. But to properly label kinetics, hybrids, and VNs, I first have to define video games. What separates novels, films, and games? Video games are easy. They're digital games, audiovisual typically, but by definition they only really have to have a game on electronics display. I'd say there's no controversy claiming VNs are digital by nature. They fit on electrical displays almost always. So the next and most difficult step is to define the game, or more importantly, the play. It's honestly hard to nail down because the origins of play are as old as humanity. They've existed in children's games and historical competitions since the dawn of time. But overall, games are defined by the aspect of play. The most important element of a game is the play. Play can be defined by three main elements, really: participation, performance, and activity. These three elements are the rules for play, and therefore, for gaming, what makes a game. Action is interactivity. Action is participation, but more so it's about the root of the word, the act. All action has reaction, and at least in a proper world with realistic rules, it should have a reaction. Action is input and should, have consequences. It should have output. Should the player not interact with a medium, it's not play. The follow-up to active play is participation, the concept that passive play isn't. Gaming is a spectator sport, but the spectators aren't the ones playing nor the ones gaming. You don't game by watching a Twitch stream. To play, one must be actively playing. They must participate. That isn't self-inserting yourself into the experience, but having stake, having input, having motivators. And speaking of motivators, the last element is performance. There needs to be a drive to perform. This can come in motivations intrinsic to the game, like scores, achievements, or even learning combos and getting mechanically competent. Or there's a performance intrinsic to the player, extrinsic to the game, like a need to perform with the intention to achieve leisure through gaming, to feel accomplished, etc. It's a unique thing to each and every player. There's a measure built upon performance. It's nothing derogatory like a win-lose state, but more about a scale of interpretation. Anyone can clear Mario 1-1, but how well you complete is important. Why you complete is important. And it isn't a measure of comprehension like in literature, but of mechanics, competency, and interaction. Therefore, outside etymology, play, and therefore games, they are defined by interaction. The player must be involved, have action and reaction interactions, and have a measure of performance outside of comprehension. In short, you gotta interact to play. To tangent momentarily, I'll tackle a concern of play and its definition. Play can be associated with recreation and therefore with leisure according to the dictionary.coms. But it's better to say that games can be leisure, but not all leisure is the equivalent of play. You don't play novels or movies unless they're considered interactive films or interactive fiction. The defining trait of what transforms a medium into a game is interactivity. Leisure activities like sunbathing are not activities, there's no action. And if I have to explain that, then you need to reevaluate how you relax and learn to chillax. Please, I'm begging you to take a proper vacation. At K-Bash. And to get back on track, I've defined play, interaction, but there's another facet to gaming discussion, interpretation. The famed ludology and narratology cavaliers, high on their horses, ass fumes, and suspended eternally in a joust over who's right. A tad dramatic, I'll admit, but that's how the internet frames it, so this is what it is. And don't worry, I'm not going to give too much attention to the non-argument, and instead opt for a simple and quick discussion. Games like visual novels, like all media, have narratives. Storytelling is a piece of the puzzle. Similar to how movies have stories, and again, it's only a piece of the sum. Films also have cinematography, and interactive films have ludographic elements to analyze and appreciate. These fields of study, these elements, they coexist. However, the point is more about if visual novels contain ludographic elements, points of play alongside narratives. Do mechanics, systems of play exist and have interaction with VNs? To which I'll allude that rules and systems within games are used to create physics and laws akin to realities. These systems exist in novels and their worlds, but with a different purpose. The purpose of a video game setting, of a TRPG for example, is to make a world that facilitates play and interaction. For example, chess simulates the strategy of historical battles, our childish fantasies of real adventures, and games of whatever world they want to facilitate. So a fictional game exists in a medium of abstraction, and visual novels achieve that fictional setting required. However, the existence of rules and means of interaction are yet to be evaluated. Their settings can have unique rules that then apply to Ludo components, like choices. To make decisions within imaginary boundaries is the root of most children's games, and in games like 999, 9 Doors, 9 People, 9 Hours, I don't remember actually, it's the core component of the visual novel gameplay. The puzzle rooms are a separate genre and an assured gaming genre, but the context and rules of the world applied to decision making in a puzzle-like manner turn dialogue and text, and therefore visual novels, into games. Given the context of characters and the rules of the prescribed death game, think Saw, there's a game made out of choice. The difference between worlds in games and books is in what context exists. It's because of input for games. The audience doesn't need context in film or novels for input's sake, unless it's for interactivity, which is a measure of play, reminder. So on the basis of interactivity, it can be argued that games require action upon the existence of worlds built for input. The conclusion can be that games need to have malleable worlds. The contrast between fictional worlds, rules, and systems and what for is the defining split for what is made for narrative and what is made for gameplay, or in rare occasions for both. It's about contextual rules and systems and abstracting conflicts into various measures of play, not just combat. The action of choice, the participation of the player, and their autonomy in that choice, and the performance from that choice, and the system and rules of that world, contextualizing that action and given reaction, justify that choice. A choice, any choice in an interactive medium, can result in the label of game. The only outlier being that nonfiction contextualizes a choice in reality, like putting down the novel because of disengagement, as a conflict and measure of interaction between the player and the work. However, that is an action taking place outside of the medium. It's in the real world, and therefore it's not in that fictional world with those rules facilitating interaction and play. It doesn't apply for that reason. And that's like kind of a weird point to make, but I was really worried people were going to poke holes in the argument using that argument, which is a non-argument. But the point is, you need a fictional, or at least a world within the medium. That's the bigger thing, the world within inside the medium, to facilitate interaction, to justify play, because there can be interaction in the real world between any medium, and that's not play. So when I hear arguments like this and about fail states and that games are only games because they're hybrid or whatever, I just get icky. Like, it's such a flaccid argument. The only visual novels that can be called novels or not games might be kinetic novels, and I'm not even sure because I don't play them. I think they have choices, they're just not narratively impacting choices. They're more about secrets, finding secrets. And even then, there's an argument that you're still making choices to get reactions within the world, and you're still like having a measure of interactivity and play and participation. And I want to make a point that like bad gaming and bad writing does not justify the work as something apart from what it was intended to be and what it actually is. A shitty book is still a book. Shitty gameplay is still a game. And the point here is that it's subjective whether it's good or bad, because it is gameplay. It is writing inside of a novel. So I'll use an example. Funny enough, QTEs remind me of Show Don't Tell. Shitty writing, like shitty gameplay, are still parts of novels and games, but are considered lesser, which is subjective. So if your opinion is that like QTEs, choices, and text-based puzzles are pissy gameplay, then piss off. It's subjective. You're entitled to that opinion. That's an argument built on the quality, not on what it actually is. Think about Fragile and how its gameplay wasn't the focus, and how it didn't ruin my experience with it because the game was more than its gameplay. So, are most visual novels games? Yes, they can have elements that you don't consider good gameplay, but there's still elements of play, therefore gaming. Therefore, they're video games. And my only exception to this might be kinetic novels, and that's just because I don't have a familiar sample size to analyze. but you have my argument in full to do so on your own, with my outline, or perhaps you're interested in making your own. I'd actually be curious to see that as well. I think it's important to defend these genres that I love, to give them the attention they deserve. Beyond being a fascinating thing to explore, getting to the root of the word and the words behind such is fun as fuck, but more so it's necessary as further gaming discourse arises. As any games continue to stretch definitions and as the industry moves in new directions, it's worth dissecting these thoughts and definitions. The last example to give is the PlayStation's production of quote-unquote movie games, the interpretation of cutscenes being seen as non-Ludo elements, and the dissection of new games taking new directions. Proper criticism and defense, even if it's built upon subjectivity, relies on proper arguments. So this video also serves as a basis to evaluate such in defense or offense of what is a game for more than just visual novels. In conclusion, I'll end it on a serious note, that your opinion of pro or anti-movie game, for or against visual novels, is subjective. Objectivity be damned, art is in the eye of the beholder, and holds no value without said eye. If art lies deep in a forest left without an audience, was it beautiful at all? And did it even matter if it was? So if you enjoy visual novels like Exocolonist or movie games like God of War 2018, don't let anyone, especially me, take that away.